We were having a very difficult journey in the wild part of the mountain when we saw the dark shape of the roof above the forest. We understood that it was a sad and strangely beautiful house, many hundreds of years old. It looked like it was not far away, but we did not arrive until the night was falling. When we reached the house, my servant Pedro broke in through a small door at the back and took me inside. He did all these things in a very silent and careful way. I was so badly hurt that I would die if we stayed out all night. We had a house to spend the night in, but I had a strange feeling inside. As I was in deep thoughts, Pedro broke the silence and said, "People were living here until a very short time ago, but they left in a hurry." Later, he began to show me several tall, richly decorated rooms. Then, finally carried me to a smaller room in a corner of the great house. That was the room where I would sleep. Pedro helped me lie down on the bed. There were a lot of very fine modern pictures in this room. I looked at them for a while in the moonlight which was coming through the windows. They were hanging everywhere on the walls all round me. Dark disturbed my sleep for a long time, and then the pain didn't let me sleep. I was so weak now that I was afraid that I was dying. So I asked Pedro to light the lamp beside the bed. Now it was easier for me to look at the pictures on the walls, and I did so. While I was searching around, I saw a small book on the bed next to me. I began to read it. It described all the pictures in the room, one by one, and told their stories. I looked and read for a long time. The hours passed quickly. Midnight came and went. My eyes became more and more tired, and soon it became hard to read the words on the page. So I reached out and moved the lamp closer. The lamp's light fell in a different part of the room, then a part that had been in a deep shadow until then. I saw more pictures, and among them there was a portrait of a young woman. As soon as I saw it, I closed my eyes. I couldn't understand why I suddenly closed my eyes as soon as I had seen this picture. Keeping my eyes closed, I tried to find out the reason. Then I realized I did it to give myself time. I needed time to think. Was I sure that I really saw what I thought I saw? Was I dreaming? I didn't know why, but I was suddenly very awake. I waited and tried to calm myself down again and opened my eyes and looked a second time. No, there was no mistake. My eyes saw what they had seen only seconds before. What I saw this time was the same as the one I had seen before. As I said before, the picture was a portrait. It was oval in shape and showing the head and shoulders of a young woman. It was the finest and the most beautiful painting that I had ever seen in my life, and I was sure that I had never seen a woman as beautiful as her. But it wasn't her beauty that shook me so suddenly from half sleep, and it wasn't the beauty of the painter's work that excited me in such a strange way. I could neither sleep nor lie down. I stayed for perhaps an hour, never taking my eyes off the portrait. Then, at last I understood. I realized what the true secret of the picture was, and I fell back in the bed again. The thing that affected me so was not the woman's beauty, it was the way she was looking at me. Her eyes, that beautiful smile, that way she looked at me, she was so real. It was almost impossible to believe that she was just paint, that she was not alive. The first time I looked at the portrait, I simply could not believe what I had seen, but now I felt a very different feeling growing inside me. I was sure that the deeper I looked into her eyes, the more afraid I would become. It was such strange, terrible fear that I could not stop myself from being afraid of her. It was not only a fear, but also something mixed with horror. I moved the lamp back to where it was before. I wanted to be rescued from her, and I managed what I'd intended. Now the portrait was hidden in darkness again. Quickly, I looked through the book until I found the story of the oval portrait. I read these words. She was a beautiful young flower, and always so happy. Yes, she was happy until that evil day when she saw and loved the painter of her portrait. They were married, but in fact, he had already had a wife. The most important thing in the world for him was his work. Nothing could be more important than his paintings. Before she got married, she loved everything in the world, but now there was one thing she hated, her husband's work. The only enemy for her in the world was his paintings. She began to hate the paintings that kept her husband away from her. And so it was a terrible thing when he told her that he wanted to paint his young wife's portrait. She sat in the tall, dark room for weeks while he was painting her picture. He was a silent man who just worked but didn't talk. So she sat still, always smiling, never moving while he was working on her portrait after hour, day after day. He never noticed that she was not healthy anymore, and not happy as well. All these changes were happening in front of his eyes, but he did not realize it. There was no change with the woman. She kept smiling. She never stopped smiling. She knew that her husband loved what he was doing a lot. He was not very famous, but good at his work. He worked day and night, painting the portrait of the woman he loved. But he could not understand that his wife was growing slowly weaker and sadder as he worked. A lot of people saw the half-finished picture while he was working on it. They tried to speak softly as he was painting and said how wonderful the picture was. They also said the portrait showed how much he loved his beautiful wife. Suddenly, she sat in front of her husband and his visitors, hearing and seeing nothing now. As the work was coming to an end, he did not welcome visitors in the room anymore and stopped showing the portrait. A terrible fire was burning inside him now. He became wild, almost mad with his work. His eyes could not leave the painting. He did not look at his wife's face either. Her face was as white as the snow. The painter did not see that the colors he was painting were no longer there in her real face. Many more weeks passed until one day, in the middle of winter, he finished the portrait. He touched the last paint on to her lips, but he put the last thin line of color on an eye. Then he stood back and looked at the finished work. As he looked, he began to shake. All color left his face. With his eyes on the portrait, he cried out to the world, "This woman is not made of paint, she is alive." Then he turned suddenly to look at the woman he loved so much. She was dead.